Section 1. The ordinary morning that changed everything. It started as one of those perfect mornings that make you forget how fragile peace can be. The air smelled of dew and asphalt. The sun had just cleared the ridge that framed our quiet subdivision, and the school bus's amber lights flickered down the lane like clockwork. My daughter, Emily, waited at the end of the driveway in her pink jacket, clutching the straps of her backpack. She was 10 and had the kind of determination that made grown men pause. Her braces gleamed when she walked, each step deliberate but proud. I stood beside her, coffee in hand, listening to the hum of the engine as the bus rounded the corner. Life in Maplewood Estates was supposed to be simple. After what we'd been through, no more hospital visits, no more moving every year. The only constant irritation was our HOA president, Karen Thompson, who believed the neighborhood existed to feed her ego. She'd fine me for my fence being nonconforming, lectured Jenna for keeping potted herbs on the porch, and once sent a warning because Emily's wheelchair ramp wasn't the right shade of beige. We'd learned to tune her out. Until that morning, Karen's house sat right at the curve near the community gate, her manicured hedges trimmed like they guarded a royal palace. For weeks, she'd been demanding that the school bus stop be moved farther up the hill, claiming the bus blocked her aesthetic sightline. The school board reviewed it, found no safety concern, and denied her request. That didn't sit well with Karen. She'd been fuming in the HOA newsletter, calling the bus a rolling hazard that doesn't belong in a premium neighborhood. I'd laughed it off at the time, but as the bus approached that day, her silver SUV appeared out of nowhere, screeching out of her driveway, nose first into the lane, blocking half the road. The driver, Mr. Grant, slammed the brakes. Tires shrieked, coffee splashed from my mug, and Emily froze mid-step. The bus veered toward the curb, metal groaning as it clipped a mailbox before stopping in a shuddering hiss of air. For a second, silence. Then the chorus of horns, shouts, and a sound I'll never forget, the sharp crack of a bumper against Karen's ornamental rock wall. I dropped my mug and ran. Emily's voice reached me first, trembling but steady. "Dad, I'm okay." She'd fallen to her knees, but was unhurt, her backpack tossed into the wet grass. The front of the bus had stopped barely 3 feet from the drainage ditch. Behind it, Karen's SUV idled at an angle, her hands gripping the steering wheel, mouth open in disbelief at what she'd done. Mr. Grant flung open the bus door, checking the students, thankfully shaken but safe. I helped Emily up, heart hammering. The entire neighborhood seemed to wake up at once. Garage doors opened, neighbors stepped out, phones already filming. Karen climbed out, fury overtaking fear. He was speeding. "This is his fault," she barked, pointing at the bus driver. Mr. Grant, a retired Marine who'd driven that route for 15 years without a single incident, just stared at her in disbelief. "Ma'am, you pulled out right in front of me," he said, voice low. "You could have killed someone." I stepped forward, shaking. My daughter was standing right there, Karen, right there. I pointed to the muddy patch where Emily's backpack lay. Her voice wavered. She almost got hit. But Karen wasn't listening. She was already dialing her phone, shouting something about reporting negligent driving and filing a complaint with the HOA board. When the police arrived, the scene looked surreal. Yellow lights flashing against perfect suburban lawns, the smell of burnt rubber mixing with honeysuckle. Officers took statements, measured skid marks, and collected security cam footage from nearby houses. Karen's composure cracked when they reviewed her own doorbell recording, which clearly showed her SUV lunging into the road as the bus rounded the corner. Her excuse was unbelievable. I was trying to remind him to use the designated turnaround. The officer glanced at her, unimpressed. "Ma'am, that's not how traffic laws work." By the time the tow truck cleared the bus's bumper from her decorative wall, most of the parents had gathered around us. Some whispered, others glared at Karen openly. Everyone knew she'd been obsessed with that bus stop. A few mothers helped Emily back inside while the paramedic checked her vitals. She was fine, just scared, small hands trembling as she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit. I could see the question in her eyes, one she didn't want to ask out loud. "Did she do it on purpose, Daddy?" That night, I replayed the footage a dozen times, each pass tightening the knot in my chest. There was no doubt Karen had waited for the bus. She'd watched it from her window, timed her move, and pulled out just as it reached the stop. Maybe she didn't mean to cause a crash, but she sure meant to cause a scene. I sent copies of the video to the police and the HOA's insurance adjuster. Then I sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the crickets and wondering how far one person's vanity could go before it became evil. The next day, instead of apologizing, Karen doubled down. She sent an email blast to the entire neighborhood claiming she was the real victim, that the reckless driver and inattentive parents had endangered the community. She even hinted that we might face disciplinary action from the HOA for allowing unsupervised children near a roadway. I nearly crushed my phone reading it. Jenna looked at me and said she's not done. She's going to twist this until people forget what really happened. And she was right, because by evening, Karen had already called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss safety reforms, thinly disguised as another attack on us. But she didn't know I'd been saving every message, every recording, every threat. She didn't know that 3 neighbors had already come forward to the police with statements about her harassment. She didn't know that this time, the community she ruled through fear was about to turn on her. And as I stood at Emily's window that night, watching the yellow caution tape flutter under the streetlight, I made a promise to myself. I'd stayed quiet long enough. Karen wanted a battle over control. She was about to get a war over truth. Section 2, the HOA turns against me. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing literally and figuratively. Karen's crash had become the talk of every front porch and Facebook group in Maplewood Estates. But while most people were whispering about her reckless driving, the HOA board had a very different story ready to push. By 8 a.m., an email hit my inbox titled Community Safety Incident Clarification. It was written, of course, by HOA President Karen Thompson. According to her official statement, the school bus had entered the curve at an unsafe speed, and she'd bravely attempted to signal the driver to stop. She even described herself as injured while protecting children. My jaw literally dropped. She'd managed to turn her own stunt into some twisted act of heroism. Then came the kicker. The HOA will be reviewing whether the location of the bus stop violates community regulations regarding street obstruction and visibility. That was Karen's code for one thing: blame me. See, the bus stop was technically at the edge of my property. The HOA had already tried to move it twice, claiming visual disruption. Now they were using the crash as their excuse to do it again, or worse, hold me responsible for the damage. By noon, I was standing in front of the HOA board in the clubhouse, surrounded by neighbors, some sympathetic, some just curious. Karen sat at the center of a long oak table, her arm in a fake-looking sling, hair perfectly set, face plastered with that smug, "I'm the victim here" expression. "Mr. Carter," she began, tapping her notes, "your daughter's presence near an active roadway poses an ongoing liability issue for the association." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter was almost killed because you cut in front of a moving bus, and you're talking about liability? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen stayed calm, playing it like she was the reasonable one. Let's remain civil. The HOA isn't here to assign blame, only to ensure community safety. I slammed a folder down on the table, copies of the police report, dashcam footage, and written witness statements. You want to talk about safety? Here's proof that you caused that crash. Her smile faltered for the first time. "That's not how I remember it," she said, quietly, glancing at the other board members for backup. But not everyone was buying it. A few parents stood up to speak. "She almost hit my son, too," said Maria, who lived 2 houses down. "This has gone too far, Karen." Another neighbor chimed in. "She's been trying to remove that bus stop for months. Everyone knows it." The tension in the room turned electric. Karen's face flushed red. She tried to regain control, insisting, "We can't rely on emotion," but she was cut off by Officer Daniels, the traffic investigator who stepped into the back of the room. "Actually, ma'am, the footage and physical evidence are pretty clear." Every head turned. The officer continued, "Your vehicle crossed the center line before the bus entered the turn. The official report will show driver negligence on your part." A stunned silence followed. Karen's jaw tightened. "Are you implying I committed a traffic violation?" "Not implying," the officer said flatly, stating. For a moment, the entire illusion of Karen's power cracked. The board members looked nervous, whispering to each other. Some neighbors even clapped quietly. But Karen wasn't finished. Later that evening, she sent out another mass email accusing me of tampering with HOA property, claiming that the bus stop sign, which was county installed, violated community aesthetic rules. It was laughable until I got a letter taped to my door from the HOA, lawyer threatening fines up to $5,000 if I didn't remove unauthorized fixtures. That's when I realized she was using the system itself as her weapon. If I didn't fight smart, she'd bury me in paperwork, fines, and false reports. I spent that night at the kitchen table, documents spread everywhere, while Emily slept in the next room. Every time I looked at her, I remembered that bus sliding toward her, how close I'd come to losing her because of one woman's ego. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to end Karen's reign over this neighborhood once and for all. And I already knew where to start: the HOA's financial records. Section 3, exposing the truth behind the HOA's corruption. For the next few days, my house looked like a detective's office. I had printed every HOA newsletter, budget statement, and board meeting agenda I could find. The dining table was buried under papers, sticky notes, and my laptop screen glowing deep into the night. Karen thought she could intimidate me with threats of fines and violations, but she underestimated something. Before I was a father full-time, I was a forensic accountant for the state. And if there's one thing I know, it's how to find fraud. I started by looking at the HOA's financials. Every homeowner was required to pay $800 a year in dues, supposedly for maintenance, landscaping, and community improvements. But the ledger didn't add up. There were huge miscellaneous expenses, nearly $45,000, marked under things like community safety upgrades and neighborhood beautification. Except there were no upgrades. The security cameras hadn't worked in years, and the neighborhood signs still had chipped paint. Then I found something strange: 3 checks written to a company called Thompson Property Consulting. Karen's last name was Thompson, and the checks were all signed by her and cashed through a local bank. That was my smoking gun. I went further back. 6 months before the bus crash, Karen had pushed through a rule banning unauthorized county vehicles on neighborhood roads. At the time, it seemed pointless. Now, I realized what it meant. She'd been trying to stop the school district's buses from coming in altogether. She had used HOA power to manipulate traffic patterns just because she didn't like the sight of a bus near her house. Every file I opened made me angrier. She'd used HOA money to pay for landscaping on her own property, approved fake board votes, and even hired her nephew to do street maintenance that never happened. I printed copies of everything and drove to the county clerk's office to confirm it. Within minutes, I had official documentation proving that Thompson Property Consulting was registered under her maiden name. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of position, it was all there in black and white. That night, I called Officer Daniels, the same one who had attended the HOA meeting. When I explained what I'd found, he whistled softly. "That's not small-time HOA drama anymore, Mr. Carter. That's felony-level fraud if you can prove intent." "Oh, I can prove intent," I said grimly. We arranged to meet the next morning. But Karen was already a step ahead. When I left the house that night, she was parked down the street in her white Lexus, pretending to check her phone. Her headlights flashed once as I drove past, like a warning. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my door. A man in a suit handed me an envelope, a cease and desist letter. It accused me of defamation, harassment, and spreading false information about HOA leadership. It was signed by Karen's attorney. She'd clearly realized I was digging too deep. That might have scared a normal person, but not me. Not after what she'd done to my daughter. Instead of backing off, I called the local news station. The same reporter who'd covered the bus crash a week earlier picked up the phone. When I told her I had evidence the HOA president responsible for the crash had also been embezzling funds, she said just 2 words: send everything. By that evening, she and a cameraman were at my house. We went through every piece of evidence, the checks, the false HOA rules, the meeting minutes that didn't match the official filings. When the segment aired that night, Karen's perfect suburban image exploded on live TV. Neighbors watched in shock as the report called her out by name. Maplewood Estates HOA president accused of fraud following bus crash scandal. The next morning, her yard was empty, no Lexus, no HOA president sign on her mailbox, nothing. But she wasn't gone. Oh no. Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. That evening, she showed up at my door, red-faced and shaking. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed. "You've destroyed everything." "You destroyed it yourself, Karen," I said calmly. "All I did was hold up a mirror." She stepped closer. "You think the HOA will side with you now? You'll be fined, sued, and blacklisted. Nobody will want to live next to the man who ruined his own neighborhood." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's fine, because I'm not stopping here. The county's opening an investigation. You're done." Her expression froze. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She turned and stormed off into the rain, slamming her car door so hard the echo carried across the block. The next day, the sheriff's office issued a subpoena for HOA records. Karen tried to claim she'd lost them in a computer malfunction. That lie lasted all of 2 hours before the IT firm the HOA used confirmed she deleted the files the same morning the story aired. The board immediately voted her out. She was stripped of her position, and the county began proceedings for fraud, obstruction, and falsifying public documents. But even as I celebrated that small victory, something darker lingered. Because deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. And I was right. A week later, while my daughter was sleeping upstairs, I found something stuffed in my mailbox. A burned piece of paper, the HOA logo still visible, and scrawled across it in red ink with the words, "You'll regret this." Section 4, The Reckoning at Maplewood Estates. The morning after I found that burned HOA paper, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, tighter, like the calm before a storm. I could feel it in the way the wind rustled the oak leaves, in the way porch lights flicked off as I walked past on my morning jog. Everyone knew what was happening. The HOA's queen bee had fallen from her throne, and now she was cornered. But a cornered Karen is dangerous. At first, her revenge came in small ways. Someone egged my mailbox. My trash bins accidentally disappeared the night before pickup. A few neighbors who'd always smiled at me before suddenly crossed the street instead. It didn't take a detective to figure out she was whispering poison into their ears. I ignored it all until the night I woke to the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside my house. I peered through the blinds and saw her white Lexus parked across the street, headlights off. She was sitting inside, motionless, staring at my home. I could see the faint blue glow of her phone lighting her face. I called Officer Daniels immediately. By the time he arrived, she was gone. But he told me something that made my stomach twist. She's under investigation, but not in custody yet. We're building a case, but she's free to move around. Free to move around. Free to intimidate. Free to scare a father whose only crime was protecting his child. The next day, I installed new security cameras, real ones this time, and shared the footage feed with the sheriff's office. I also got a call from the local news reporter who had broken the fraud story. She wanted to follow up, especially after learning that Karen had been spotted arguing outside the county building. She's saying the whole thing's a setup, the reporter said, claims the HOA accounts were hacked and that you're behind it. That was it. Enough was enough. I decided to take this all the way to court. I gathered every document, every video, every statement from witnesses. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak up started coming forward. One of them, an elderly man named George, told me that Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for her private gardener. Another neighbor confessed that Karen once ordered her to repaint her entire fence because the white made her house look dull. The case grew like wildfire. Soon, even the county attorney's office was involved. They confirmed what I'd already uncovered. Karen had misused over $60,000 in HOA funds for personal gain. She'd falsified minutes, bullied the board, and violated half a dozen state laws. But there was one last thing I hadn't seen coming. When the investigators subpoenaed her emails, they discovered something chilling. Karen had sent an internal message 3 days before the bus crash, telling another board member to block the side road near the elementary school, only for a day or two. That road was where the school bus crashed. That email turned a case of fraud into something much bigger. It proved what I'd suspected from the start. Her construction detour wasn't an accident. It was intentional negligence. She didn't care about safety, only her view and control. The DA's office decided to press full charges: reckless endangerment, misuse of HOA funds, and obstruction of a county investigation. When the court date arrived, the courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Karen walked in wearing her perfect blue suit, hair tied up tight, acting like she still ran the place. But her eyes told another story, wide, tired, desperate. When I took the stand, I told everything. About the way she'd mocked my daughter's wheelchair at meetings, the harassment the night she blocked the school bus road, and the day my little girl almost didn't make it home. I showed the photos, the security footage, the emails. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers turning and Karen's shallow breathing. When the judge finally spoke, it was like thunder in a bottle. "Miss Thompson," he said coldly, "you have abused authority, endangered lives, and betrayed public trust. This community deserves better. You are hereby sentenced to 2 years in county custody, 5 years probation, and permanent removal from the HOA board." Her jaw dropped. She tried to shout something about it being a conspiracy, but the deputies were already walking her out. That night, when I came home, the whole neighborhood seemed lighter. People came by to thank me, some bringing casseroles, others just a handshake, and "we're sorry we didn't speak up sooner." Even the new HOA president, a soft-spoken retired teacher, came to my door with a stack of papers and said, "Mr. Carter, we're removing every rule she passed. You and your daughter are safe here." Safe. I hadn't heard that word in months. The following weekend, the school bus made its first full trip through the neighborhood again. The driver stopped at our driveway and waved. My daughter, sitting in her wheelchair with her oxygen tube tucked behind her ear, smiled wide. "Daddy," she said softly, "is the mean lady gone?" I knelt beside her, hugged her close, and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. She's gone. For good." As the bus pulled away, I looked toward Karen's old house. The for sale sign swayed gently in the wind. The once perfectly trimmed hedges were overgrown. The mailbox leaned to one side. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like our home truly belonged to us. Because in the end, justice didn't come from rage or revenge. It came from truth, persistence, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his child. And in neighborhoods like ours, sometimes that's the only thing strong enough to stand against people like Karen.